At Stanford, 2 of 15 on third down last week. Here comes the blitz. Birnbaum goes down, fumble for football. Vandals have it. It's Chris Snofoinga. He is gone. And Birnbaum is hurt. Touchdown, Idaho. Birnbaum's down at the 33. Touchdown, Idaho.
His back or his neck, but you can see pressure right up the middle. Kosi will come. Nofoinga comes up the middle, and there's just a big pressure that's put on by Maltosi, and then it's off to the races for Nofo. Huge turn of events. Cougars were looking like they were going to put it in the end zone or get 3 out of it.
Touchdown like they did, Baylor did to UNLV. What an incredible finish to that football game a week ago. That'll be.
We are the tribe from the north, we're brave and we're bold. Defeating our rivals never gets old. Making our way to the Big Sky Conference. Watch out, 'cause here comes the silver and gold. Whoa, whoa. This is Tubbs at the club for the Vandals of Idaho.
Welcome back, Tribe from the North, Brave and Bold, to the official, unofficial podcast of your Idaho Vandals and the Vandals affiliate on the Big Sky Podcast Network. I'm your host, Brian Marceau. And look, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see the show's a little bit different. No co-host Dallas Hammer in Spokane. No producer Martin. So buckle up for a bumpy ride with producer Grandpa Brian. But we're joined by our favorite former University of Idaho beat reporter, or one of our favorite formers, because we have a few favorite formers. We need a power ranking show on our favorite reporters. But enough talking the superlatives. Teren Kowatsch is back, second time in the saddle, first time as a co-host with me. Teren, I don't know where you live. You don't have to tell people, but how's it going? I know you've had a life change since you were on Tubbs of the Club as a beat reporter. You're here just spewing hot takes. You told me you're ready. But Teren, again, you got to update everyone. You're no longer the LM Tribune. What's going on?
Yeah, so I'm now the full-time sports reporter at the Whitman County Gazette, focusing on, more of the high school, smaller teams and towns in that area, like the Colfaxes and the Oakdales and the St. John's, people like that. It's a lot of fun so far. But yeah, University of Idaho alum, been a Idaho fan all my life, always down to talk some Idaho football.
It's always worth following you on Twitter. I mean, look, you still talk Vandal football, so it's cool. But if you want pictures of like old stadiums, old scoreboards for high schools to play 8-man football, Teren he's clearly my go-to. That's coming from a guy who teaches at a school that plays 8-man football. But we're done talking about high school sports. Maybe if Tubbs the Club crashes and burns someday, maybe that's our future, Teren, which is a future I'm done entertaining. But look, you guys, you know what we're here to talk about. It's Around the Bar, brought to us by Hughes River. We've got our final out-of-conference game. If you want to know how the first two went, 1, pretty well. 2, listen to both of our post-game reaction shows. But before we get started, we have a special sponsor for this episode. And, dude, you guys, the Oktoberfest that we've been talking about for a while, it's this week, guys. It's September 13th when we record it. Oktoberfest itself for University of Idaho, Tap the Keg, that takes place September 16th. That's the night before Idaho gets to beat the shit out of Drake. So, look, come drink beer with Coach Eck before the home opener game at Tap the Keg. University of Idaho Alumni Association is inviting you to an on-campus Oktoberfest September 16th. Tickets include 10 beer tastings, a commemorative beer glass, and by the way, I can't go because I have to be out of town. I'm going to try to steal someone's glass. Live music, and new memories with your favorite kinds of people, aka Vandals. You don't want to miss this event. Check out uidaho.com/tapthekeg for tickets. So we're around the bar, Teren, and the only topic of Around the Bar at this moment is Idaho is going to host Drake. Big deal for Idaho because finally, as an FCS school, we get an out of conference game that matters for the playoffs. Finally, as a Big Sky school, we get let's say a guarantee game or we're buying a win right now. But Teren, I'm going to throw it to you. You've been on the show for 5-ish minutes now, doing a great job nodding. Your understanding of Drake, man, who are the Drake Bulldogs?
They're just, a bottom tier FCS team, and that might be a bit harsh, but the results speak for themselves. I mean, so far this season they've had 2 games. The first game was against North Dakota State, and everyone who knows FCS football knows that it's those guys at the top, and they got it was 56-14, I believe the score was, so pretty well handled, and then they barely came out in overtime against a Division II team. So like you said, this is obviously crazy stuff can happen, but this is as close to a guarantee as Idaho can get. If they do lose, it's more so they did something wrong than Drake did something right, I think.
You mean some things wrong? Because look, Drake, yeah. So Drake Bulldogs, we're going to give you go a little bit over the character of this team. So Teren already touched on it last week. Drake lost last week. They're 0-2. They lost to Missouri S&T. That's a Division II school, a not particularly good Division II school. Missouri S&T went 6-5 last year. In 2021, Drake Bulldogs picked up 2 wins. Drake games, if they are close at all, they're universally low-scoring affairs. That is just the character of this team, which both games this year, that's what Drake's had on their end, 14 points each time. That's whether they're playing North Dakota State or they're playing a D2 team. That's 2 touchdowns each. In 2021, just as a reference point or barometer, Drake lost 45-7 at Montana State and 38-0 at North Dakota State. Those are 2 big. Everyone who listens to this show knows about Montana State being a very good FCS team. North Dakota is a pretty solid FCS team, but you guys can handle that math. Blowouts in each one. So I guess, Teren, first question, because we're going to spend a couple more minutes just talking about background for Drake. If this game is close at all for Idaho, 1, there's going to be a lot of panic in the dome. Mm-hmm. But 2, if this game is close, what do you expect is going right for Drake?
Right for Drake, I think the pass defense first and foremost. Despite X generally accepted identity of preferring to run the ball, but being somewhat lenient with the percentages, I think that this is the game that if you were to let Giovanni loose, it would be this game. The last couple of games, Indiana, despite not being a particularly great Power 5 team, their secondary was still a strong point. Same with Washington State, even though they was it's just a good defense in general. So I think that if Drake does somehow get close, it's because they're maximizing any opportunity they have of forcing turnovers, and I think those come through the air first and foremost.
Yeah. So like you're already talking about, Drake is a Pioneer Conference team. That's a non-scholarship FCS conference. There is a gulf in talent between the top or even middle of the Big Sky and even the top of the Pioneer Conference. And by the way, Drake is not the top of the Pioneer Conference. Right now, Sagarin has Drake rated as the number 246 team in the nation. If you're curious what the comparison is for Idaho, well, first off, 246 in the nation, easily worst in the Big Sky. Northern Colorado is worse than Big Sky Northern Colorado's worst Sagarin team in the Big Sky. They're 217. We've all seen how Idaho State looks pretty damn rough. Idaho State's a 201. So there's already a gulf in what we're describing between Drake and the bottom of the conference. Idaho's at 136. So more than 100 slots above Drake. Clearly, there's going to be a talent difference. Jason Eck, in his press conference, did talk a little bit about some Drake players to pay attention to. Quarterback Ian Corwin, his stats don't jump off the page, but look, full disclosure, Drake is 0-2 and got their ass kicked in week 1. There's no one on this team who you're going to look at their box score and you think, okay, well, that guy's going to hurt Idaho. But Ian Corwin, he's 23-55 on the season, 244 yards. That's 41.8% completion percentage, 4 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. But I think Jason X said that we're going to notice about Corwin is he's not a he's not a drop back passer and that he doesn't stand in the pocket and deliver. They're going to run a lot of bootlegs, a lot of plays. Honestly, some of it might look a little bit like Mason Petrino-ish Idaho in terms of a lot of passes. He's rolling out to the right, outside the pocket, looking for short yardage. Guy can use his legs a little bit. He's got 25 rushes for 48 yards, a long of 20. But keep in mind, he's been sacked 7 times, which has taken 27 yards off his overall rushing total. The top running back for Drake is Dorian Boyland, another guy Jason Eck referenced. He's 33 rushes, 99 yards. Top receiving target in terms of individual catches is Austin Flack, 7 reception for 43 yards. But look, Teren, Drake's obviously going to be doing maybe their version of what Idaho did in the last 2 games. So Drake's goal here is going to be to keep the ball as long as they can. And they're going to try to keep that score around probably 20-ish points. Hope that between Drake holding the ball and Idaho having no problem holding the ball, you're just going to diminish the total number of possessions. And that way the mistakes a Drake team needs to keep this competitive are magnified with the fewer possessions going back and forth.
Yeah, that's another reason why I think they might go to the pass game more on Idaho's side, just to get those quick strikes and not give Drake the chance to hold the time and possession battle, because, I mean, that's what Idaho's done the last 2 weeks, is try and control the clock. And I think they know how to defend it at this point because they've done it for 2 straight weeks. And, you know, in terms of the mobile quarterback, kind of like what you said, Drake's version of Mason Petrino, another good thing, the Idaho defensive line has gotten experience against a mobile quarterback in Cam Ward week 1 and did a relatively decent job. So I think Drake is coming in with a good game plan. It's honestly, with Drake, it's the only game plan they have to win. But I also think Idaho, just based on what they've done the last 2 weeks, is more than prepared to handle that.
Yeah, and look, I'm going to run through some 2021 stats for Drake, just because I really got to stress, guys. Drake is paying. This game is being played in Moscow because Idaho is expecting to walk over Drake. Big Sky schools do this with Pioneer Conference schools for the most part. I already went over Montana State beating Drake 45-7 this year. That was why on my Big Sky Power Ranking show, when I talked about Cal Poly barely beating San Diego 28-27. San Diego's another Pioneer Conference team. They're better than Drake significantly, but they're certainly not good. That's why that was so jarring. The entire point of these games is a guaranteed win for the Big Sky schools. But look, here's the point output for Drake in 2021. They have one big game. They score 45 in their first week against West Virginia Wesleyan, which that honestly sounds like a Bible college, kind of like Zach Kloss opens up with in Moscow, or, you know, a lot of Big Sky schools are doing the Bible college thing for guaranteed wins in basketball. And I hate it, but okay, West Virginia Wesleyan was like 15 people at the entire school. Don't even know how they feel at the football team. Other than that game, here's Drake's scores. 7 points against Montana State, 0 points against North Dakota, 21 in a loss versus Valparaiso, 6 in a 6-3 win at Butler. That's a second win for Drake last season, so everything else is a loss. 10 in a loss against Dayton. 10 in a loss at San Diego, that same San Diego team I referenced a second ago. 0, but it was a forfeit against Stetson, so I don't know, not bad. 0 points in a loss at Marist. 14 points against St. Thomas in a loss, and closing out the season with 14 at Davidson. So honestly, outside of playing God knows who West Virginia Wesleyan, this Drake team beat 20 points once all of last year. There's no way for this team to be competitive other than they're effective running the ball, which, by the way, that's a weakness for Drake on a strength. That's a weakness on strength match that favors Idaho. And Idaho's just going to have to turn the ball over a ton. But actually, in X press conference from a couple days ago, that was one of the improvements he highlighted about Idaho going week 1, week 2, where we're tracking what are these impressive losses, or to me, what their impressive losses. You can actually answer that in a second, Teren, if you thought they were. What improvement is Idaho showing these impressive losses? Well, 2 turnovers for Idaho against WSU, 0 for Indiana. You have to expect at this point, Idaho is game planning as though the only way they're going to lose this game is if they personally lose it through multiple, essentially self-inflicted gunshot wounds. But I guess because now to me, it's kind of boring now talking about Drake themselves. I want to throw it to you, Teren. How do you feel about the idea of Idaho's the 2 losses since you're here? You covered them in the fall. I personally thought Idaho looked broadly impressive in the 2 losses, but was that your takeaway?
Oh, yeah. I think that against a Power 5 school, the fact that we came into the season thinking that the offensive line was going to be a weakness and the pass defense was going to be a weakness. So far, it looks like just the offensive line, and even though they were thoroughly outclassed, especially in the Washington State game, it didn't really look like that was something that was so bad that it was going to translate into the FCS season. So for the pass defense not to give up, hardly any big plays to an offense that's supposed to be one of the most explosive through the air in the Pac-12, and against Indiana holding a lead for the first half, I think that the only thing stopping Idaho from winning those 2 games was the fact that both those schools had Power 5 number of scholarships and Idaho didn't. I think that they've showed significant improvement in areas that we thought were going to be a weakness. And, if kind of mentioned how there's one game for Giovanni Mccoy to let it fly, that goes hand in hand with the offensive line. If there's a game for, the offensive line just to be bullies in the trenches, it's this one. But I think that Idaho has shown to be an overall really solid team. Dallas kind of touched on it in one of the previews that they haven't shown the ability to finish games yet, but that's just because, the depth of an FCS team, even a Big Sky team compared to a Big Ten or Pac-12 team, is just not there. But I think, again, I'm not going to say this is going to be as dominant as last year's Simon Fraser game was, but if there's a game that can be comparable to that in terms of how good Idaho looks, I think it's this one.
Oh, dude, absolutely. Look, one of the things that is markedly better for Idaho has been secondary play. Like Marcus Harris looks like a very good cornerback in Big Sky play. Tommy McCormick has been all over the place, forcing turnovers, making plays. And look, he forced the fumble that Marcus Harris returned against WSU. He picked off the Basilak pass that was second half pick, correct?
I think so.
Okay. The reason I'm asking is because the broadcast for the Big Ten screwed up and they listed Basilak as having 5 interceptions though I would love him to have had 5 picks. That's a different game. He didn't quite have 5 yet. He threw 1. But anyway, secondary is looking significantly better. And the reason I bring this up again against Drake, Ian Corwin, the quarterback, like we said, the Pioneer Conference version of Mason Petrino, against Missouri S&T, dude goes 15 of 40 for 177 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. Again, that is against a team that is nowhere near as strong as Idaho. This is clearly, and look, I'm going to shift over to talking about what this game means for Idaho, because we can do position by position matchup. It doesn't matter. The point of this game is Idaho is better across the board than Drake. Idaho is going to pick up an FCS win. And look, I want to take your temperature on, Teren. I said in our preview episode, it really sucks that Jason Eck had to open up his first 2 with all the excitement that it has existed, especially in contrast to last football season around Idaho football. It just sucks that Idaho had to open up with 2 Power 5 games before this. Well, Idaho looked pretty damn good. And in my mind, this is probably the most enthusiasm I'm ever going to see for an 0-2 football team. So what Idaho is looking to do is, one, we need fans to show up. Eck in his press conference referenced the number 10,000. Man, we better get 10,000 people in that facility, because with the work that Eck and Co have done in terms of outreach, the athletic department's done a lot of work with outreach too. And with the effort Idaho had against Power 5 teams to start the year, if they're not going to get reward with butts and seats, my Lord, I don't know what they're supposed to do to start getting butts and seats. But this game to me is going to feel like it's not actually homecoming, but this will feel for a lot of people like this is the opening of what Jason Eck at Idaho, we're all hoping it's going to become. On the Idaho side, first thing I'm going to look for, look, you already talked about Giovanni Mccoy, and I'm I'm going to stay there too. Giovanni Mccoy had moments in the last 2 games where you can see where he could be a pretty solid Big Sky quarterback. He's got an arm for sure, and he can run okay. He's not going to break a ton of long touchdowns, but he could run enough to extend plays. That mattered in the first 2 weeks. I'm expecting to see Giovanni Mccoy look like the guy I saw at the fall scrimmage, and Teren, you saw at the second fall scrimmage, where he's hitting tighter windows. Idaho's able to break plays. I'd expect, look, Hayden Hatton, to our knowledge, is not going to be playing in this game, or to my knowledge, Hayden Hatton's not going to be playing in this game. But I do definitely expect we're going to finally see Therese Trainer look like the all Big Sky level talent he was last year as a 3rd-team all Big Sky player. And really, look, X showed he was a gambler in the first 2 weeks. I'm going to quit filibustering in a second, Teren. This is the kind of game that I'm hoping to see Idaho get aggressive and put some points on the board immediately, because if Idaho can buy themselves some flexibility, there's a lot of ways Jason Eck can make this game interesting, even if it's a blowout like it needs to be.
Oh, yeah. This is, in terms of making things interesting, I think this is going to be a showcase. I mean, briefly mentioning Giovanni Mccoy again before going to the rest of the offense, he had a really strong showing against Idaho's first-string secondary. If he could do that against us, then I expect him to do just as well, if not better, against Drake.
And just pause real quick, contextualize. You're saying in the scrimmages you watched while reporting, Giovanni looked good against Idaho's secondary, and we've now seen, look, the jury's in. They're at worst a pretty solid Big Sky secondary, and he looked good against them. Drake is not that.
They're not at all. This should be a proper showcase, even with Hayden Hatton out. We've seen flashes from Dwyer. We've seen flashes from Jackson. Trainer, hasn't quite broken out these past couple of weeks, but I also think it's because he's, on the scouting report, what scouting report Power 5 groups have on Idaho, it shows that he's the number 1 receiver. So that you're going to, on strong side or number 1 cornerbacks, you're going to put them on him. But, I think Giovanni's just going to tear that secondary up. Anthony Woods, I mean, again, bringing it back to the scrimmage, we saw him break a 65-yard touchdown. I'm not calling a 65-yard touchdown, but we've seen in these past couple games he has the speed, he has the vision. So I think him and Roshan are both in for good days. The defense, I think this is going to be, I think the defensive line is just going to be all in that backfield of Drake. I wouldn't be surprised if at least 4 or 5 sacks come from this game. I expect, like you said, McCormick has been having a really solid year so far at that safety spot. Marcus Harris has looked pretty shut down again against Power 5 opposition. So I think there's a lot of players and a lot of groups to look at. Because, again, this is a game that across the board, Idaho should dominate. So I think that, like you mentioned before, Idaho at least so far looks like a solid Big Sky secondary. And Drake is a bottom-tier Pioneer League team. They should be pretty much a show and tell for Idaho on, what their players can do.
Yeah, I want to talk about the receiving room for a minute, because one of the things that both we expected, because Jason Eck talked about it preseason, but it's not 100% materialized, and Jason Eck has said at the chalk talk of the fall scrimmage, it's just not going to in the way he had planned. Jason Eck, there'd been a lot of talk about 2 tight end sets right now, especially with Alex Moore being out, undisclosed injury at this point. Alex Moore had been the number 1 target of Giovanni Mccoy through, or one of the top 2 targets of Giovanni Mccoy through fall camp. He just hasn't been there due to injury. But in the receiving room right now, you already talked about Therese Trainer getting off to a slower start, which in 2 games, 3 receptions, 42 yards. We all know, look, Therese Trainer, he doesn't suck. He was going against the number 1 DB for one. Washington State has a pretty damn good defense. Like, they just beat Wisconsin 17-14 at defensive battle. That was number 19, Wisconsin at the time. So the Washington State defensively, they're real. And it's not like Indiana's terrible. Certainly relative to Big Sky teams, they're going to be fine. So we know Trainer's going to look better. Jermaine Jackson 2 games, maybe he's the slot receiver. It's a surprise that he's been as effective as he has been. 7 receptions, 161 yards, no touchdowns. But you also hit on it. Look, this might be a surprise to people in terms of volume of reception. Freshman Jordan Dwyer has 8 catches, 2 touchdowns. He's certainly showing why the hell he's playing as a true freshman. And this is the kind of game to me where we're going to see at least a couple of receivers. They're going to get those stats back up to equilibrium if this goes the way it should. And I fully expect it should. Ditto the running back room, which is Rashawn Johnson looked way better in week 2 to me than he did against Washington State. And true freshman Anthony Woods, he's currently the leading rusher in terms of total yards. Woods is at 21 rushes for 100 yards. Rashawn at 25 rushes for 82 yards. I expect we're going to see a healthy dose of those 2 guys. And I expect if you're a person who at all, look, a lot of people were impressed with Anthony Woods in the first 2 games because you should have been. Rashawn, not as effective against WSU, but then against Indiana looked a little bit better. I expect this is going to be a game where we see maybe a little bit more of the 2 running back sets because this is a line we can certainly overpower, and that we're going to leave this game excited about the 2-headed monster running back we have, which is different now. Initially we thought it was going to be Andre Carter and Rashawn Johnson. It's clearly Anthony Woods and Rashawn Johnson.
Mm-hmm. And even though Andre hasn't been utilized as the number 2 back so far, that doesn't mean he's not going to get any looks in this offense at all. He's still a bowling ball of a person on the goal line situation. I mean, we saw last year that they used him a lot in there. I don't think that would necessarily change. And we know that Jason Eck likes to run a lot of similar formations that have different route concepts and different run schemes in them. We also know he likes to run pretty much the same route tree and same run concepts out of different formations. So, he's done so far, even in just 2 Pac-12 games, of really getting a lot of different players involved and utilizing people that we didn't expect. I mean, during the scrimmage, Dwyer was one freshman that he was pretty definitive on was most likely not going to redshirt. And by the end of fall camp, he was the number 4 receiver. So him having a couple really good plays so far and showing that he's that guy on the team is not necessarily surprising. I'm pretty shocked that he was able to find a touchdown against that Washington State secondary. But, in terms of him getting a lot of looks in the offense, that was something I expected. Didn't expect this early. I thought it was not going to be until Big Sky season. But yeah, and back to the running game, Rashawn Johnson and Anthony Woods I think they've kind of found a niche for themselves in this offense, of Anthony Woods being the quicker back who can be used in a lot of, 3rd down sets and a lot of zone scheme runs to just, fill any blocking holes quick. And then Rashawn has always been the do-it-all back. He has the size, he has the speed, he has the strength, he has the vision. So yeah, like you said, this is going to be, I think we are going to see a lot of 2 running back sets out of this, especially since Alex Moore is still hurt. But I also think there's going to be a lot of play action and RPO and bootleg stuff. Again, I don't think Jason Eck is going to put his whole entire playbook on there, because he still has Big Sky competition to worry about, and I don't think he wants to give him more film than he has to. But that's the point. I don't think he will have to.
Yeah, he has called 3 trick plays so far. 1 against WSU, 2. By the way, side note, I didn't get a talk on the reaction episode. Stunning faith in my mind to see that first running back pass from Rashawn Johnson, which that had to be the rain that made that slip, because Eck called another Rashawn pass and the pass looked a little bit better. If you guys missed the game, first running back pass, man, and dude, Whitney was open too. That the play worked as needed in terms of misdirection. Whitney's open, no one behind him, but Rashawn slips. The ball goes 500 miles up, 2 feet forward, almost 2 feet still exaggerated.
It was basically a punt. Yeah.
Yeah. The second pass went to Giovanni. But the reason I'm saying that is, well, he's called 3 trick plays against Power 5 teams. Maybe we'll see another one. Eck clearly is fine being a gambler, or at least having some fun plays. He's not the primary play caller. Luke Schleisner is, but you have to expect if there's 3 trick plays called that well, X at least okay with that number in 2 games.
And I can say there's definitely more trick plays that he hasn't shown either, too.
Okay. So hot take, guys. Like I said, Teren's here for the hot take. He's slamming tall boys. Yeah, there's more trick plays to come.
I wish it was a tall boy. It's a truly, unfortunately. No.
You just destroyed the mystique. But anyway, look, we've covered this. Idaho wins essentially every single matchup. And when I say essentially, I mean they win every single matchup.
Mm-hmm.
The only end result for this game acceptable in Moscow is obviously a literal W. We're not in the world of metaphoric wins anymore. Look, Jason Neck in his press conference said Idaho looks pretty squarely like an average team right now. That wasn't to put down because previous years they've been a bad team. One of the things he talked about is Idaho needs to limit self-inflicted mistakes. That's how you beat good teams. But if Idaho's at worst an okay team, an okay to solid team, which I think saying like an average team, which is what Eck referenced, is selling it a little bit short. But we're still in the world of interpreting info from impressive losses. Those have to become wins. So Idaho obviously has to win this game. Teren, in your mind, talk about aesthetics for a second. What is your definition of an actual win here for Idaho? Because to me, this can't be close if we're going to maintain the enthusiasm Idaho had from those first 2 close losses. It has to be a little bit different.
I think they need to put at least upper 30s, and I am meaning at least literally. And if they give up more than 10 points to this team, I mean, you mentioned their score line, 14, 17 seems to be their cap the past couple seasons. So if they allow more than 10, then I think that, again, multiple things went very wrong on the defensive side of things. And on the offense, I mean, they should be scoring from everywhere at will. So I think, like I said, I don't think this is going to be as bad as the Simon Fraser game, or good for Idaho, bad for the opponent, for Simon Fraser. But I do think this is going to be, a pretty big statement win. So if I were to give a score prediction, I would say...
I'm going to pause you. We'll get there in a second.
Okay.
So you're describing kind of win that I want to see. I got a question I got to ask you now because, look, you said on our show, Jason Eck was hoping to play freshman quarterback Jack Lane 4 games. Redshirt the dude, get him 4 games worth of experience. This is the type of game where, look, I don't know if in X mind it's blowout or not, because if the number Jack Lane's going to play this year is 4 games, presumably a few of those might not be blowouts. But if Idaho's going to see Jack Lane play, which, guys, I fully expect we're going to see Jack Lane hit the field. If Eck wants him to play 4 games, this is one of the games that I'd say this is a pretty damn safe gamble to expect we're going to see freshman Jack Lane play. What kind of player are we going to see come in for whatever number of snaps Lane presumably is going to take?
A very smart one. First off, he makes his reads, and I mean, I think I talked about it the last time I was on. He was one of the 2 quarterbacks, along with Rich Dawsonall, that was allowed to be hit, and he took some hits, and he didn't really falter. There was a couple throws he made while he was literally in the air in the process of getting tackled, and he completed them. So he has a stronger arm than you would think from a guy. I think he's listed on the Idaho page at 6 foot or 6'1". He has a stronger arm than you would think, especially for a guy that size who's a freshman. But he's very smart. He has good mechanics. He reads the ball well. He and Giovanni are very similar in a lot of different ways in terms of, they're both capable of being mobile, but that's not their go-to, and that's not necessarily their strength either. But he and Giovanni are very similar. So like you said, I think this is a game he's going to get reps. But yeah, I think that's a player that people can think is people can expect to see is just a smart quarterback who goes through his reads and is capable of, taking a hit and getting back up. He was kind of he really led the 3s and 4s in scrimmage well. And, I thought it was unfortunate that he didn't get the chance to play in the second scrimmage because he was banged up a little bit. But from the first scrimmage, if that holds into the game, I think a lot of Vandal fans are going to be pretty impressed.
Yeah, you references build. Jack Lane listed at 6'1", 190. Giovanni Mccoy is listed at 6 foot 175. So, yeah, that's in terms of stature, relatively similar. So let me paraphrase what you're saying. Lane he's not beating team with his legs as his primary weapon. Like, this isn't a guy you're going to confuse as someone who's going to be playing at Montana State.
Yeah.
But guy has a solid arm, solid to good arm. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. He uses his legs more to extend plays, although against a team like Drake, Drake should be getting outclassed athletically by Idaho.
Oh yeah.
So that you might throw that description out the window this week, but just this week. But you wouldn't say like Jack Lane's going to be beating Montana with his legs or something like that.
Yeah.
Reference that coaches like his football IQ, and yeah, I mean you just talked about a guy who, look, the coaches are clearly high on Jack Lane, which clearly means there's a handful of things he has done well, at least in practice and scrimmage. We should get to see him against Drake, and I mean realistically, I'd expect if Lane's going to play 4 games, the 4 games you'd have to expect X targeting would be at least these next 3 for the first 3, as in Drake, Northern Arizona, Northern Colorado. Of course, you'd have to say context dependent, because Northern Arizona looks a little bit better than we might have guessed. Northern Colorado, there's a world where they can look okay. We'll get to that in picking the Big Sky. But you just gave us a run through Jack Lane. Yeah, man, I just think this needs to kind of feel like a celebration for Idaho, as in beating the shit out of the other team. Seeing a little more fun out of the Jason Eck offense. Not to say his play calling hasn't been fun. It has. He's gone for 4th a ton of times. It's more us getting more rewards, as in both WSU and WSU and Indiana. Idaho had a ineffective drive in the first quarter, and then a long time in between then and our next sustained drives. We have to see a handful of those. Look, we've gone through the details. This is going to just truly for Idaho come down to our defensively, our front 7 secondary have already looked effective against Power 5 teams. They're going to look effective against Drake. Now's the time for our offense to take a step forward, if only for a week, because we know the offensive line is not going to become radically different in a calendar football season. The guys we have are already here. You've talked about on our show, talked about private conversations, that the number 1 offensive line guys look like solid Big Sky guys, but there's a gap between 1 and 2. This needs to be a game where that gap is irrelevant. Now it's time for score prediction, Teren. We already know it's going to be an Idaho win. What's your score?
I'm going to say 52-6.
Yeah, 52-6 sounds okay. I'm scrolling up through the comment section because we had a cut in the comment thread. We had a handful of score predictions. For example, one of our favorite listeners, Patrick Ferks, predicted 42-6 Idaho. Have Cheetahs, Will View predicts a 52-7 win for Idaho. I'm going to go with, okay, you said, what'd you say, 42-6?
52-6.
52-6, okay. God damn it.
Did I say you scored?
Yes, 17. I'll do 48-3 is my prediction for Idaho. But look, you guys, again, you can handle that. We're picking blowouts. As far as Dallas Hammer and Martin Hot Take Heemstra, this is where you're along for a bumpy ride of me scrolling through our outline. Dallas picks Idaho to win 45-10. Martin picks Idaho to win 55-17. Hot take. Teren, need to have your response to Martin here, who we love Martin. He's our best producer. 17 points for Drake sounds like the Martin Sunshine and Rainbows for Drake. If Idaho surrenders 17 points to Drake, is that a metaphoric loss for Idaho defensively?
If the offense puts points on the boards, I wouldn't call it a metaphorical loss. But
just
I would
the defensive
say,
side of the ball.
Just the defensive
in
side
your
of the
mind. In your mind, Idaho gives up 17 points. Is Rob Orich okay with that output?
Oh, absolutely not. Like, from a fan perspective, that might be okay, but from the defensive coordinator's perspective, absolutely not. that would not go over well.
Yeah, you're saying, okay, 100% agree. Honestly, anything more than a touchdown unless it's because Idaho's playing like their fourth string and the game's over and the EC has officially decided, look, we're just getting people reps. The guys who might not play otherwise are going to be out here. God knows what that's going to do with the final score. But look, that's we got score predictions. Obviously, all of us are picking blowout wins. Before we get to picking the rest of the Big Sky with Teren, Teren, if you go undefeated this week, you're just going to win our pick'em. But look, this has been you're around the bar. Brought to us by Hughes River Expedition. If you're looking for a great all-inclusive week-long vacation, don't look past your backyard. Venture into the largest protected wilderness in the continental U.S., located right here in the great state of Idaho. Enjoy a multi-day trip down the Middle Fork of the Salmon, the main Salmon River of no return, the Salmon River Canyons, or the Selway. And you can even check out special trips like the one to see the Perced meteor shower. Camp on pristine beaches, run amazing whitewater, hike scenic trails, spot wildlife, soak in beautiful natural hot springs, take in the history along the river, and fish some of the most remote stretches of river in the country. You just bring your clothes? Let HRE handle the rest. Hughes River Expeditions has been Vandal owned and operated since 1976 and ready to take you on a vacation of a lifetime. What are you waiting for? Find out what it's like to grab a paddle, catch dinner, and ride the bull all throughout the Gem State. Call them now at 800-262-1882 or check them out at hughesriver.com. Picking the Big Sky. All right, Teren, you've of course been paying a ton of attention to the Big Sky as a whole, correct?
Yeah.
Good answer, because if you don't, you can always listen to the Big Sky Podcast Network Power Rankings on this show, which goes through every single game, every single team each week. Idaho sits at number 5 right now. So, Big Sky Pick'em. I sit at 20-3. Dallas is 20-3. Dallas and I always just pick the same games anyway. Martin's 18-5 just because he universally picks Montana to lose. So, schedule for this week. We're going to start. Montana State will finally have maybe some bad news. Montana State, they're like Montana. They have a couple FCS games they get to buy as wins. It's usually against shitty teams because the whole point is pad the playoff wins part of their resume. Montana State travels to Oregon State. Oregon State with wins against Boise State and Fresno State, which means Oregon State, if the Pac-12 collapses, may be a solid Mountain West school. Dallas picked Oregon State. Martin picked Oregon State. Who's going to win Montana State, Oregon State?
I think it's going to be Oregon State. I wouldn't be surprised if Montana State's able to kind of turn it into a game like Idaho's had the last couple of weeks where they look good or decent in defeat, but Oregon State also looks like a pretty okay Pac-12 team this year. So I think that Oregon State comes out with a win, probably a 2-score, 3-score victory.
Yeah, you're in line with me. I'm going to pick Oregon State. Thing I'm looking for is one, Montana State is down to about their 4th or 5th string running back. That's not an exaggeration. The Isaiah Fonse he's out until well into October. When Isaiah Fonse is healthy, in terms of just as a rusher, he's the best running back in the league in my mind. Might not be the best overall player, but as a rusher, he's the most effective rusher. Lane Sumner looked great in week 1. He's out as well. Tommy Mellott had a solid passing game last week. However, it was against Morehead State. It was terrible. I don't expect Mellott's going to throw for 250-plus yards against Oregon State, but Montana State does have the lines on both sides of the ball to at least keep it respectable for maybe half. But like I said, Oregon State should pick up a win. If Oregon State can beat Boise State and Fresno State, they need to be able to beat Montana State. Next, Montana travels to Indiana State. That's an FCS game. Montana's 3rd FCS game of the non-conference season. Who you got, Teren?
This one's hard, not necessarily because of Indiana State being great, but because Montana State traveling halfway to across the country, it's, sometimes teams just don't get off the bus. I'm still going to give them the benefit of the doubt and pick them to win. But I think this is another game that might be closer than some people realize.
Well, Montana with Houck, they don't mind having the games be a little bit lower scoring than you might guess. Montana's coming off a 24-7 win hosting Missouri Valley, South Dakota, who, by the way, Missouri Valley, South Dakota is a better football team than Missouri Valley, Indiana State. Indiana State sits at 181 in Sagarin ratings. South Dakota's 139. 181 in Sagarin would put South Dakota, if they were in the Big Sky, just above Cal Poly. So I'm going to pick Montana. I mean, this is honestly one of the ideal out-of-conference type of games because Montana has the money to do this periodically, even though it's a road game, is if Idaho can get to a point where we're scheduling like Western Illinois from Missouri Valley out-of-conference, pair that with a Pioneer League game, that's the ideal. Montana's there, we're not. I expect it's not going to be that close. By the way, Lucas Johnson transferred from San Diego State, quarterback. He's been like the ideal Bobby Houck quarterback, a guy who can throw for around 200-ish yards, is efficient, doesn't make mistakes, and makes plays with his legs. And I was going to say where the hell Indiana State is, but I drew a blank, and I'm done worrying about Indiana State. Next game on our slate, Cal Poly travels to South Dakota. South Dakota, we just covered how they were last week. They're going to have revenge on their mind, Teren. But Cal Poly, I mean, look, they're fresh off a narrow win over Pioneer San Diego.
You know what? I always like having one upset on here. I'm going to pick Cal Poly to win.
You're going to pick Cal Poly to win because you, like any person doing great research, you saw Jaden Jones, freshman quarterback for Cal Poly, dual threat, throw for 385 yards against San Diego, and he made you a Beau Baldwin believer.
That, and I also think Cal Poly's the perfect trap team. I think they're a team that can, if there's just, one team 1 week that just doesn't take them seriously, I think they can shock them and, upset them. And I'm gonna predict that South Dakota does that against Cal Poly this week.
Now, here's my concern picking South Dakota. The Coyotes in 8 quarters, though it was a rough 8 quarters at Kansas State, at Montana, there's 7 total points on the board in South Dakota. Cal Poly has looked strong against the run. They can't stop anyone from passing. And then also the offense, on the offensive side of the ball, Cal Poly is essentially just the inverse. They can pass all right. Jane Jones looks solid, but look, Cal Poly is going to be able to run on no one. They could not run against San Diego. I'm going to go with South Dakota, but this is probably the game I feel the least confidence in because of the, like I said, 8 quarters, 1 touchdown. Maybe South Dakota's reeling from the loss of last year's special teams coordinator, Rob Orich, more than we realized. Next game on the slate, we have 0-win Idaho State against 0-win Central Arkansas. Now, maybe I should make sure Tara knows. Tyler Vanderwall, quarterback for Idaho State, is not going to be playing in this game. He's out 4 to 6 weeks. He broke his collarbone again. Does that change your pick?
Yeah, I think it's hard to go from very little passing offense to none at all and come out with a win. So, I mean, yeah, I would say Idaho State probably loses this one. Now,
it is in Holtz Arena. According to ESPN right now, you could get tickets to that game for $15. So maybe that's what Teren's going to be doing is, no, like, look, Idaho tickets, way too expensive. Idaho State, if they're $15 now, they'll be like $5 come game time. I'm going to have a tough time picking Idaho State against anyone, especially with Vanderwall out, because I don't know where points are going to come from for Idaho State. Hunter Hayes is simply not particularly good. He looked this week like he did last year in that 5-ish yards per attempt, Dylan McCaffrey territory. Sagan Gronauer played a little bit, and we've seen him over 3 years at Idaho State. He is not the answer. There's a reason he's not playing, and Idaho State has not been able to run the ball at all. Now it was against Missouri. It was against Mountain West teams, but Central Arkansas, they're typically like a perennial number 25-ish in top 25 FCS team, but bottom half of the top 25. I am certainly going to pick Central Arkansas, but part of that is because the Central Arkansas plays on that purple and gray striped field, even though that's not where this game is. But Idaho State is going to have a rough rebuild, and I just don't know where their win's going to come from. Next, we have Northern Arizona hosts North Dakota, which as far as FCS on FCS matchups in the Big Sky, that's probably the best matchup. NAU just beat Sam Houston State 10-3 in a game that God knows who picked that game other than the NAU podcast. But who do you got in? Look, to me, this is the game that's going to prove if last week mattered for NAU.
I'm gonna give NAU the benefit of the doubt and say that Sam Houston win wasn't a fluke. Momentum's also important, and I think beating one of the best teams of the FCS can definitely give a team motivation, even if they might not necessarily be the favorites or be at a disadvantage. I think NAU goes on a bit of a streak with this game. I'm going to pick them to win.
So you're riding NAU to have a bit of momentum when Idaho opens their week 1 of Big Sky play in Flagstaff. I am still a little bit tepid here. I'm going to go North Dakota. North Dakota looked quite respectable at Nebraska week 1. Now you might say, well, Scott Frost was still there week 1. Point taken, but still, that's a Power 5 team. North Dakota looks solid. Honestly, if North Dakota had won that game, Scott Frost might be one of the first coaches ever to be fired after the first game. Second, North Dakota beat Northern Iowa last week. That's like quote unquote that Northern Iowa is kind of a joke in the Big Sky podcast world because it seems like Northern Iowa, there's nothing they can do to get out of the top 25 and get out of the playoffs. They're always going to be 6-5 and get the benefit of the doubt. But that means they're always 6-5 in the Missouri Valley and relatively solid. I have a little more faith there than I do in Northern Arizona, which has 13 points in 8 quarters. I'm still not confident that on the offensive side of the ball, enough is going right in Flagstaff, and I need to see another game before I accept defensively Northern Arizona is what they were against Sam Houston, because the last few seasons, NAU's been battling Idaho out pass defense-wise of who can be worse in the Big Sky, with the only exception being Idaho State sometimes would take over that mantle. Sacramento State, look, we just referenced Northern Iowa, and now we see another, maybe this is the other best FCS on FCS matchup. Sacramento State travels to Northern Iowa.
Maybe Northern Iowa gives them a few problems early in the game, but I think Sac State's going to walk away with this one.
Yeah, Sacramento State, if you're thinking of Sacramento State from last year, where it took the Hornets a month to figure out what they're doing offensively because they had a weird 2-quarterback system, it took them a month to figure out how to do that weird 2-quarterback system with Asher O'Hara. He kind of is like their Zach Borisch, except they do let him throw, and Troy Taylor's a much more creative play caller in that regard. And then Jake Dunaway is their traditional pocket passer. Well, they have that down. Scored 56 points in week 1 against Utah Tech. Yeah, Utah Tech sucks, but whatever. I'm going Sacramento State because I don't think Sacramento State's going to have that lag time. They're picked number 2 by coaches, number 3 in media and Big Sky preseason poll. And I think that was the right call. I really do think the Hornets are going to keep contending for the playoffs. So Sac State, I think, is going to get a big win. And the Big Sky has to pick up some of these OOC wins against the Missouri Valley Conference. And if, in my mind, NAU is not going to get it, well, Sac State better. Our favorite Northern Colorado Bears travel to Lamar. Teren, have you been paying attention to our Northern Colorado deep dives? And if so, how has that informed your pick?
I didn't think nepotism could get any more apparent than what it was at Idaho during the Petrino years, but they topped us somehow, some way. They did it. I do have a question for you, though, because you might know more about this than me. I forget his name, but there was another quarterback that came in and was like, not a high bar to clear, but was better than the head coach's kid who was quarterback. Is he going to be starting this week?
Well, look, that's going to be the question around Northern Colorado week in and week out until it happens. What you're referencing is Dylan McCaffrey has started both games for Northern Colorado. He's been unimpressive because that's who he is. And Jacob Sermon, transferred from Central Michigan, who started about 4 games for Central Michigan last year. He hasn't lit the world on fire, but Northern Colorado's looked like a different team when he's starting. In short, look, Ed McCaffrey pulled his son relatively early. So my guess is Sermon doesn't start, McCaffrey has to be hearing it from at least the administration at this point. I'd expect if Dylan McCaffrey starts, there is going to be a short leash. So, and when Jacob Sermon's in, he's a solid RPO quarterback. He's a guy, look, if he was in Idaho's quarterback room, I would not be disappointed. Don't know if he'd win the job, but he certainly would be a guy who, if we saw practice, we'd say, okay, I see how that guy was a starter at Central Michigan. So I know I'm personally going to go with Northern Colorado. I'm really not confident in the pick because Northern Colorado did lose to Houston Baptist, who's a shitty FCS team. But there is some talent, really. Like, they're not terrible.
Mm-hmm. It's also the offensive play calling that even if Sermon is in, that I just can't trust Northern Colorado with everything I've seen and heard from you guys. I'm going to go with Lamar on this one.
See, well, what you're talking about, of course, is famous project offensive coordinator for Northern Colorado, Max McCaffrey, where led Northern Colorado to 12 points per game Big Sky play last year. Now, if Sermon plays, they do more RPO, which kind of takes the ball out of Max McCaffrey's hand there, and that's part of why, to me, there's this small amount of faith in Northern Colorado having some potential. They have one of the better running backs in the league in Elijah Dotson. Defensively, I don't know if David Hoge, he's their all Big Sky linebacker. I don't believe he's going to be back, but I got to quit talking about this game because I'm starting to talk myself out of Northern Colorado, even though I don't have a ton of faith in Lamar because I don't think you should. Next game, man, this is going to be quick. Weber State hosts Utah Tech, a.k.a. formerly Dixie State.
Weber.
Yeah, you're basing that off of Weber beating Utah State 35-7, not surrendering a single offensive touchdown. New offensive coordinator at Weber State. I'll look up his name someday, but I didn't care to research the offensive coordinator at Weber State because it changes every year. Nothing changed except maybe this year. Weber State looked for real last week. I voted them number one in my power poll. Look, Sacramento State hung 56 points on Utah Tech. Expect Weber State to try to, they're not going to get to 56, but expect them to try to get to that 40. San Diego Pioneer Conference team in our next game, they're going to travel to UC Davis.
Even though UC Davis has greatly underachieved, I think, even for the majority of Big Sky riders picking them to be around the middle of the pack team, I still think UC Davis comes out with the win on here.
Yeah, I think so too. UC Davis is coming off a 2-point loss to South Dakota State. Looked pretty damn good. Quarterback Miles Hastings looked probably as good as he ever has at UC Davis last week. Ulonzo Gilliam not as effective, weirdly not as effective against South Dakota State as he was against Cal. But San Diego is neither South Dakota State nor Cal. So no, UC Davis should win that game pretty easy. We covered Idaho. Eastern's on a bye before they open Big Sky Conference play with Montana State. Portland State is on a bye before they open Big Sky Conference play with University of Montana. So that's the Big Sky. We have officially picked it. Teren, before we call it a night, look, anything Idaho related you want to get to? This is your first time as a backup co-host, doing an admirable job, specifically with the clunky production you've had to deal with. Any other Idaho stuff you want to roll out before we close the bar?
I would say just for this game with Hayden Hatton out, this might be the best opportunity we have all year, or at least up to this point, to see Zach Borisch at wide receiver. So for people still, excited to see Borisch playing what he can do at wide receiver, I think this is going to be a game where he definitely gets some targets.
Dude, I hope we get to see Borisch at receiver at least, because I can tell you when I know that part of this has probably changed in X mind because look, there's been some guys who've emerged that when he first came over, there was no reason for him to know that Eck was going to be as high on Jordan Dwyer as he is, or that Anthony Woods would emerge like he has. And that explains some of the snaps for that earlier when Borisch was labeled a slash. We would have projected that those haven't materialized. But look, that dude, one of the weirdest, in some ways unfortunate, but also some ways interesting college football stories I've been around. He's been in 5 different position groups since he's been at Idaho. Had a rough time, with Petrino. Not saying this is Borisch's fault at all, but in terms of being recruited to play quarterback and immediately shoved out of the quarterback room. Then he's the running quarterback where you saw Idaho last season. The story was Borisch was pretty damn impressive in spite of everyone always knowing exactly what was going to happen. A lot of excitement about what that could mean for this season hasn't materialized, but I would keep in mind it's a long season. It's both a long and short season. It goes by in a blink, but there's a lot of weeks still left to play. Guys will go down. I hope we get to see Borisch's number called because I really think he's a dude who could be effective. He was our leading rusher last season, going against a stacked box every single week. I really hope we find a way to get him in.
He didn't look bad at wide receiver in practice.
Well, hey, dude, talk about what you saw at wide receiver in practice because you saw more than anyone who's listening to our show will have seen.
Yeah. So for the wow, words were hard there for a second. For the first couple of weeks, he didn't get any active reps in like any 7-on-7 or 11-on-11 sessions because he was dealing with some injuries. But the second scrimmage and the last few weeks of practice, he was able to, and he looked really, really good. He got most of his reps with the 2s and the 3s, but funny enough, we were talking about him. Jack Lane was throwing him the ball a lot, and they were connecting pretty well. So, maybe that's a situation. I don't know exactly where he is on the depth chart currently, but with Hatton out and Alex Moore currently still being hurt, someone's got to get some reps in the, in wide out sets and at the number 4 spot, and it might be Borisch. That might be something to keep an eye out.
Yeah, in the depth chart published previously to the WSU game, which also, look, you're a reporter, so depth charts are kind of accurate. Borisch was listed in the same slot as Jermaine Jackson, but as the number 2. He just hasn't seen the field. By the way, Jermaine Jackson's looked great, but look, you brought up this is fingers crossed. This is a catalyst where we get to see Borisch play a little bit more. Don't mean that as a complaint because we have very good guys. We're at the hour mark. We have a lot of guys who we spent a lot of time talking about. Idaho's solid at the skill positions. Borisch is just a guy I hope still gets out there because I think he could be effective for sure. Yep. We've seen him be effective. Thank you for bringing that point up. We are officially done, guys. Get your ass to Tap the Keg on September 16th if you can. Then get to the Dome on September 17th. We need to reward Jason Eck. We need to reward Idaho for doing all the right things we've talked about. Game kicks off at noon. Otherwise, ESPN Plus, guys, we're officially done now having to care about, do you have a dummy Fubo TV login? I did for a week. Can you steal someone's Pac-12 login? I did for a week. No, dude, it's back to this. It's the simple time now. It's all FCS games. Now Idaho's essentially in their own playoff where we have 2 losses, 3 max this football team can handle if the playoffs are going to be in the picture. We should not have to worry about one of those taking place this week. So with that, Teren, thanks for joining us. It is time for the best band in all the land to play us out. If I can find the video in the brand section to close us out. Thanks for joining, guys. Go Vandals. Motherfucker.
So raise your glass and have a drink with me. Here's to the Vandals and the craft.